There is an unavoidable reality built into the DNA of modern AAA video games. A lot of them are born with an expiration date. Plenty of big-name studios chase the cutting edge, marveling at the hyper-realism of today, only to watch it inevitably end up looking like a relic of its time. But in 2011, a Japanese game director named Sawaki Takeyasu decided to build something that would never decay. And to do it, he made a choice that felt almost unforgivable, to him at least. Reflecting on his creation, he told Eurogamer this: "I had to betray the gamers in a way," he said. Did it work? Was that betrayal okay? So today, let's take a look at the result and see if we can find exactly what it was he felt he was betraying.
Let me tell you a tale. It took place 360,000, no, 14,000 years ago. Well, to me it seems like only yesterday. To you, could be tomorrow. It's the story of a man, known by 72 different names. What should I call him? When we first met, his name was Enoch. And even then, he wouldn't let anyone tell him what to do. Not even me. But he was a pretty good guy.
Sawaki's game was called Elshaddai, Ascension of Metatron. It came out in April 2011 for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. The premise is simple enough. Enoch, an immortal human scribe, is sent down from heaven to recover 7 fallen Watcher Chiefs called the Grigori before the Council of Heaven wipes out all life on Earth. He spends 3 centuries searching, then finds them gathered in a place called the Tower, each presiding over their own strange floor. Most of the game takes place in said tower, with Enoch going through each of these floors and subduing the Grigori one by one. When it comes to his betrayal, he wasn't being dramatic, he was being honest about the game he had just shipped, a game that looked like nothing else on the market, and told a story that didn't fully fit inside the box it came in. But I've teased you for long enough. This is Elshaddai. Elshaddai is the rare PS3 game I played in 2026, 15 years after its release, that didn't really feel dated, with its visuals surviving the test of time. Actually, more than survived, they're thriving, even for today's standards. Whatever Sawaki did, he did it in a way that survived 15 years of better graphics tech, the death of the console it launched on, and 15 years of the industry shifting around him. Now, Sawaki didn't have an art team of 50 people. He didn't even have the budget of a Square Enix flagship. The studio that developed the game was small and collapsed mid-launch, with most of the people who worked on the visuals leaving the games industry within 5 years. And yet they accomplished something special, a visual language that constantly shifts, going far beyond what anyone else was doing in 2011. Just to put things in perspective, here's a couple of examples of what a 15-year gap in visuals can look like. 15 years can span roughly 2 to 3 console generations. But if El Shaddai released today, it wouldn't look a single day old, let alone 15 years. Now, this might be a good time to ask, why? Why does this still work so many years later when it doesn't for so many of its peers from the same hardware generation? Sawaki's 2024 Famitsu retrospective used a phrase for it, a worldview that doesn't look old, even after years pass. He said it again the same year to CGM, this time using two specific concepts, nationless and timelessness. To get where he's coming from, you have to understand who Sawaki was before El Shaddai, and what he was trying to do with it. Sawaki Takeyasu joined Capcom in the late 90s. His career there took him from Devil May Cry through Steel Battalion. Then he went to Clover Studio, where he worked on Okami as a character and monster designer. Okami would become an eye-opening moment for Sawaki. It came out in 2006 on the PS2. It looked like nothing else on the market. The whole world was rendered in Sumie-inspired cel-shaded visuals, with black charcoal outlines giving way to watercolors that bled across the screen. Critics and players loved it, but the game was a massive commercial failure, and Clover Studio was closed by Capcom in 2007, just a year after release. Sawaki didn't stay at Capcom. He went to UTV Ignition, a small Western publisher that wanted to break into the Japanese market. They gave him his own studio in Tokyo and gave him the freedom to make whatever he wanted. The only constraint? Keep the budget small enough that even a modest Western hit could turn a profit. With absolute creative freedom, Sawaki embraced the two concepts of nationless and timelessness. So let's first explore the one used as a constraint he gave himself, the design rule that would organize the whole game: nationless. The visual language bed of El Shaddai is built on top of this constraint. If you can't recognize the world as Japan or medieval Europe or ancient Mesopotamia, if you can't recognize it as anywhere, then you have to give the player something else to hold on to. For Sawaki, that set of cues was an intense, striking artistic identity. Each chapter, the world transforms, not just the architecture, the entire visual grammar, color palette, line treatment, material, lighting. This looks like X trigger that your brain fires whenever you enter a level. Sawaki was deliberately breaking that trigger every chapter, forcing your brain to start over. And the rule that he encoded to do it was simple. Each angel's obsession crystallizes into their chapter. Sawaki encoded those obsessions into the level's visual language, and sometimes its mechanic. Once you start looking for the rule, you can't unsee it. Every chapter is a different bet. That being said, let's go over some of the Grigori and their respective chapters to show you what I mean. Ezekiel's inspiration in game, from the apocryphal Book of Enoch, is associated with clouds. On his chapter, the first thing you walk into is a floor and sky of pure black, with trees whose trunks are painted in a semi-transparent brown. The foliage on top is a single wide, slightly pink and green watercolored element, almost like a cloud or even a flame, moving in the wind. Later, the sky shifts into a warm, greenish orange. The clouds rolling in are drawn in a style I can only describe as Hokusai-like, evoking the famous ukiyo-e artist behind the 36 views of Mount Fuji. It captures the same curling, highly stylized shapes Hokusai used to draw waves, except here, they're clouds, churning in a strong wind, solid enough to ride across massive chasms. Another Grigori, Sariel, who was charmed by the love between man and woman, came to Earth to be loved by humanity, and has built a paradise of followers who adore him. So the chapter is a paradise, but a slightly absurd one. One of the platforming sections here is a stylized landscape of rounded blocks and geometric shapes. It feels incredibly clean but playful, defined by thick, wide line work. Yet, inside those rigid boundaries, the colors are incredibly soft, gentle, bleeding watercolor fills that shift from color to color, complete with strange, circular, negative spaces that emphasize just how abstract and simple this world is. And the place is filled with Nephilim, angel human kids. They're depicted in this silly way, a beige sausage with tiny legs and arms, no fingers, just dots for eyes and a small circle for a mouth. You see them doing non-threatening things, rolling giant balls, falling from the sky, floating around carrying platforms, moving up a wall like a caterpillar. The whole place is a kindergarten for them. In contrast, the actual boss fight against Zariel takes place in an intensely serious, atmospheric arena, but that climax is preceded by the world of the Nephilim. The chapter essentially hands you Zariel's vision for a paradise for his children, forcing you to walk through and experience its tranquility for a few minutes, before the violence inevitably begins. Now, Barakel the Grigory is barely there. He designed the tower and was consumed by his own Nephilim before Enoch could face him. So the match here is less about a depiction of Barakel and more about the chapter being a representation of what he left behind. Since his work is the gigantic building most of the game takes place in, his realm is meant to match it in size. It takes place among towers with lots of open space and long spikes all around, with the Nephilim that consumed him rampaging in the background, throwing meteors and destroying the platforms you move through. You consider the distance at all times. But what's most striking about this place is the scale. All the empty space, giant towers, and the Nephilim are meant to make you feel small. The next floor's Grigory, Azazel, is the angel who controls evolution and technology, who cultivated a deep fascination of human evolution and its potential, and whose descent to Earth has caused a large amount of angel technology to fall into the mortal realm. The chapter is, frankly, the most literal of the bunch. A hyper-advanced sci-fi city, all metallic buildings, lights everywhere. If you told me this was a level of a different action game from the PS3 era, I would believe you. The whole chapter is a motorcycle sequence. Enoch is given a futuristic, full-body armor just to ride the bike. It's arcadey in that old-school way, like a Sega cabinet, and the chapter feels like it's about that. Like Sawaki's team said, the Angel of Technology gets a technology chapter, and didn't dress it up further. The aesthetic is the most straightforward of the lot, the least abstract, but that is exactly why it stands out among the rest. Next up we have Armoros. Now this one is wild, but not entirely because of the floor's artistic direction. Armoros was a friend of Enoch who came to love humans, lost his voice when he fell from heaven, and specializes in dance. The chapter takes that image and runs with it all the way. The setting is an underwater cave, which through visuals and music sells you the idea of a quiet calm. This changes drastically at the very end, when you find yourself at the entrance of a high-class club, screens on the walls and blue lights everywhere, and then you find Armoros on a stage as a silent pop star. And he has stage dancers that fight you in the background while he performs at the front of the stage. The camera is fixed at hip level of Armoros, surrounded by a force field you can't penetrate. He teleports to the front of the stage as the fight progresses, making it harder to fight the dancers behind him. It is genuinely funny. The whole sequence plays like an absurdist comedy bit. Another chapter belongs to Belial. He is technically not a Grigory. He's the Prince of the Darkness, an outside entity who made a deal with them in exchange for the souls of everyone who dies in the tower. He is a presence more so than a physical entity, and the chapter accordingly has no character to depict. It only has an environment to depict him as. The whole stage is painted, and I don't mean drawn in a painterly style. I mean there's a layer of painted colors on canvas, with the canvas texture included, that sits on top of the world. The first half of the stage is predominantly light red and subdued white, a veil of red laid over the world. The second half has a moving skybox, liquid mercury, mostly white and light blue with a little dark gray, and the platforms on top of it are greenish, reddish, whitish, with gradients in between. I could keep going, but hopefully you get the idea. Each chapter has its own match between visuals and chapter antagonists. Some are more directly entwined than others, but a single fact remains. Even in the chapters that have no watcher associated to them, the visuals are just incredible. And that visual variety isn't a coincidence. There was a genuine engineering effort to make something that stood out among its PS3 and 360 peers. The game uses a custom real-time shader pipeline built by 3 people, an art director named Sotaro Hori, a rendering programmer named Tsuyoshi Okugawa, and a technical lead named Narito Nishizawa. Their brief phase for the project, a world that keeps changing. Now, what is a shader pipeline, you ask? Well, I don't want to fill this video with too much technical jargon, so I'll try to keep it simple. A shader is a tiny program that runs on the graphics chip, the part of the console or PC that's drawing what you see, and decides what each pixel on the screen looks like every frame. A shader pipeline is a chain of those programs running in sequence, drawing shapes, applying colors, adding light. The painted canvas overlay in Belial's chapter, the Hokusai clouds in Ezekiel's, the geometric kindergarten in Serial's, the underwater cave in Armoros's, all completely different visual identities which, under the hood, are all rendered through the same custom pipeline. As per Famitsu's 2011 Game Tools and Middleware Forum coverage, each stage of elshaddai is rendered with quite intricate, geometric, fantastical visuals, in which patterns calculated by shaders constantly move in response to light and cameras, with post-effects layered on top. Here's a great example of what this pipeline does. There's a layer of painted texture on top of the screen that doesn't move when the camera moves, an immovable layer absolutely positioned on top of the screen. And here's how you can see it. That painted overlay only shows up when the foreground geometry is rendering. The moment the skybox takes over, pure sky, no foreground, the layer seems to disappear. Not because it's hidden, since you can see a little bit of its colors, but because the shader pass that introduces the color lessens when applied to textures different from the foreground. This produces a ghostly shifting effect where the world feels tangible and hand-painted under your feet, only to instantly dissolve into the twisting, metal liquid background whenever you move the camera. That's the magic of their shader pipeline, built and configured in a specific way for each of the chapters. And all of this brings us back to the second part of Sawaki's quote. Let's talk about timelessness. There are multiple ways a game can become timeless, but it usually comes down to mechanics, narrative, soundtrack, and art direction. Three of these elements always remain entirely age-agnostic, no matter the approach. Great music will always move us, a brilliant story will always captivate us, and a game that genuinely feels good to play will never lose its magic. It is significantly trickier, however, when it comes to a game's visuals. This comes from the idea, very prominent since the rise of 3D graphics, that the final desired outcome of visuals is realism. And while I admit I'm impressed as much as the next guy by how amazing the realistic visuals of a game like Red Dead Redemption 2 are, if someone truly wants their game to be timeless, then this is far from the best way. Eventually, hardware with much higher specs will release, rendering technology and tools will improve, and with time those amazing, realistic visuals will start to look dated. And that really is the bottom line. As soon as a game is made with realism in mind, the game will have an expiry date. If you've seen everything I've shown you up till now, you probably know where I'm going with this. And even if you hadn't, this idea is not particularly new. Plenty of developers and designers realized this decades ago. People like Genova Chen with Journey, Fumito Ueda with Shadow of the Colossus or Ico, Atsushi Inaba with Okami, and even Yoshiki Haruhana with Wind Waker. If you truly want your visuals to be timeless, the only way is to abandon realism and embrace style. And the trap of realism was particularly enticing in the PS3 and 360 era. With the rise of HD gaming, developers tried going all out on realism. This resulted in a generation of games that, in my opinion, generally looks completely bland and uninteresting. Aesthetically, this is a generation that will forever be remembered for its relentless use of brown, gray, and green color patterns and an excessive use of post-processing effects like bloom, motion blur, and depth of field. Now, just look at elshaddai again. This was basically an oasis of color and beauty at a time of extreme visual drought. But this begs a difficult question. If the game is so visually memorable, then why did it never make a splash in the games industry? Well, there's at least three reasons. First, the game had little to no marketing. They probably had a really tight budget, with lights up with ignition being closed soon after the game released. Second, the gameplay itself is really kinda mid. All very repetitive and bland, and in a world where both Devil May Cry and Bayonetta were showing the industry just how far a character action game could be pushed, Elshaddai just played it so safe they might as well have replaced all combat with firm, polite handshakes. Third, and certainly not least, is that the game just feels unfinished. There were multiple instances where I felt this, but the very ending of the game is a perfect example of what I mean. So if you're worried about spoilers, skip to this timestamp. At this point in the game, Enoch has fought through 6 Watchers and survived Belial's darkness. He finds himself in front of a floating pyramid. The pyramid opens. Semyaza, the leader of the fallen angels, is supposed to be in it. But once open, there's nothing inside. Your guide throughout the whole game, Lucifer, makes a phone call. Yes, a phone call. I haven't talked about some of the silly idiosyncrasies this game has, like Lucifer constantly reporting to God via phone calls like he is some insane micromanager, or Enoch wearing denim jeans under his armor. There's really a lot of things I will not talk about, so if you like what you see, you should consider playing it yourself.
Be seen. Looks like their descent went wrong, right from the very beginning. Uh-huh. Hold on a second. Enoch! Aren't you forgetting you still have work to do here?
Right after we get a narration saying the Tower of the Watchers is no more, and that humanity is now free to follow the natural road of evolution. Roll credits. If that felt anticlimactic to you, imagine what it feels like after going through the entire game yourself. This sudden ending is just an excellent representation of what the story for the whole game feels like, incomplete and disconnected. Sawaki himself admitted to this in the most candid of ways. See, when you finish the game, you get access to a PDF file exclusive to the game's 2024 re-release. Yeah, so PDF file. Again, this game is a little crazy here and there, but bear with me. The document is called Lucifer's Fall. In its foreword, we find the following note. Due to budget restraints, elshaddai's development was cut short and Semyaza, the final watcher, never appeared in the final scene of the game. The 3 short stories contained within this book are additions to the story originally released in 2012 that couldn't make the final cut of the game. It's a tragic yet incredibly honest peek behind the curtain. The game was forced to sprint across the finish line, leaving major narrative arcs on the cutting room floor and, 15 years later, forcing a PDF to do the heavy lifting story-wise that the game itself couldn't. This clash between grand ambition and harsh development realities is exactly why the game feels like such a beautiful contradiction, but it's also the reason why it never really took off. It was never able to become a complete masterpiece. Elshaddai is a curious beast, made manifest by Sawaki's timelessness realization. It is a game that absolutely nails its visuals and has pretty nice music too, which I use throughout the video, but absolutely did not do nearly as well in the other departments. And I'd argue it's that gap resulting in mediocre reviews from outlets, along with the little to no marketing, that cemented the game's financial destiny. That, however, does not mean the game failed to become timeless. In my eyes, Sawaki very much succeeded. Despite my gripes and playing this game 15 years later after its release, it is undeniable to me that the game is worth experiencing. Let's remember Sawaki's words back in that Eurogamer interview from 2011. I had to betray the gamers in a way. Did it work? Was that betrayal okay? 15 years after, the answer has finally crystallized. If the goal of the 7th console generation was to chase a narrow, concrete definition of next-gen realism, a world of militarized grays, muddy browns, and hyper-detailed plastic skin, then elshaddai didn't just betray the gamers. It betrayed the entire era it was born into. It refused to anchor itself to 2011's technological limits, choosing instead to float in a vacuum of sheer artistic identity. Because while the gameplay itself may have played it safe to a fault, and while the narrative frequently collapsed under the weight of its own abstract ambitions, Sawaki ultimately achieved exactly what he set out to do. He bypassed the expiration date that claimed so many of its contemporaries. By stripping away the visual trends of its time and leaning entirely into a breathtaking, nationless, ever-shifting aesthetic canvas, he built something impervious to age. When we look back at the history of this medium, we don't remember the games that met our expectations with a safe, predictable competence. We remember the ones that dared to alienate us, to confuse us, and to show us something we had never seen before. Elshaddai is not a perfect video game, far from it, but it is an unforgettable piece of art. And in a world where so much of the industry's history has aged into a blur of indistinguishable grit, Sawaki's beautiful, audacious betrayal wasn't just okay, it was exactly what we needed. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.